Once, a man was riding his mountain bike in the woods like he did every day. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise, like a baby crying. Curious and worried, he followed the sound and found a torn bag tied with string. When he opened it, something surprising happened. It was nighttime in the woods, and he saw another man who looked suspicious, holding the same bag. This man had creepy eyes, and he dropped the bag on the forest floor and hid it under a bush. It was clear he didn't want the thing inside anymore. Later on, another person came by the same spot in the woods. Chris loved to ride his mountain bike at sunrise. For him, every day started with a 2-mile ride, come rain or shine. Unfortunately, this morning he was so taken by his surroundings he didn't notice the gnarled branch lying across the trail. He hit it on a down pedal and suddenly went careening over the bicycle's handlebars. Winded from the fall, he sat for a moment and assessed the damage to himself. There seemed to be none besides a few scrapes. Then he checked his bike, and thankfully it was also fine. He was about to resume his ride when he heard something disturbing. At first, it sounded like a baby screaming in the distance. Chris stood still and listened. No, not a baby. The sound was too thin. It was an animal of sorts, and it was clearly in distress. Chris laid his bike down and started to follow the sound. He left the trail and walked into the trees, making sure he took mental markers so he wouldn't get lost on his way back. The sound was really close, and he soon realized that it had come from a clump of shrubbery to his left. Chris dropped to his hunches and found a ragged canvas sack with the lips sloppily tied with a length of frayed wire. He felt his blood freeze in his veins. Something was alive inside, and whatever it was struggled, hissed, and protested, trying its best to rip through the canvas, but it just wasn't strong enough. Chris pulled the sack from under the shrubbery and quickly started to unravel the knot that held it closed. Inside the sack, the struggling intensified. He could just imagine the little creature's panic. The poor thing could see nothing and was probably exhausted from struggling to free itself. Whatever it was, holding the sack at arm's length just in case, Chris finally pulled the lip open. When he saw what was inside, he was flabbergasted. It was a tiny kitten, no more than a few months old, pitch black with a white heart on its chest. The little animal was bedraggled, nothing more than skin and bone. It had clearly not had a meal for a while. The little eyes were wild with panic and exhaustion, and it was obviously in a lot of pain too. Chris removed the water bottle from his backpack and tried to pour some water into a hollow piece of bark. For a moment, the kitten forgot all about its struggle for freedom. It drank it all and then twice more as Chris refilled the makeshift bowl. Slowly, carefully, he reached out to touch the kitten. It was still halfway in the sack, and it reared back as its ears flattened against its little head. It tried to hiss and then gave a loud wail. At that moment, he realized the kitten wasn't only thirsty and starving, it was badly injured too. Chris thought quickly. The only way to deal with this was to get the kitten to a vet as quickly as possible, but he was miles out in the woods and he was on a bicycle. It was not an ideal situation, but he'd have to make do. He fashioned a crude sling from his bandana, slipped it around the kitten's body, and then put it in his backpack. Then, at a brisk pace, he set off to where he had left his bicycle. Once he was riding again, he veered off the trail and made his way to the main road. Then he started pedaling as if he was in a race. It was all about getting the injured kitten some help as soon as possible. 90 minutes later, Chris stopped in front of the local vet's office and rushed inside without even removing his backpack. The receptionist looked at him quizzically. He explained, while struggling to regain his breath, that he had an injured kitten in his care and that it needed to be looked at immediately. Chris was removing the cat from the backpack when the vet walked in. He took one look and beckoned for him to follow him into the examination room. On the examination table, the kitten cowered and drew its ears flat again. The pain was overwhelming. The vet gently picked it up, held it in front of his face, and looked at it from all sides. The kitten tried to hiss again with the same result. Chris had seen its little face contorted in a grimace of agony and discomfort. The vet told him that its pain was probably caused by internal injuries. Most of these would be treatable, he said, but if it had a spinal cord injury, then the little animal would likely die. Over and above the physical injuries, it was also severely malnourished and dehydrated. He asked Chris if he knew the animal's owners or if it was possible the kitten was struck by a motor vehicle. Chris explained that he had found the kitten in a canvas sack in the woods and that he had no idea what had happened to it, nor where it came from. The vet made a grim expression, so the cat had been abandoned. This meant that someone had tried to get rid of it, and the poor thing now belonged to no one. Who was going to pay for the treatments it needed, and what would become of it if it had ever survived? Chris thought for a moment, then told the vet to do what was necessary. He would stand in for the bill himself. 30 minutes later, the vet was back in the examination room with the x-rays he had taken. He put them up on a light box and studied them carefully. Unfortunately, it seemed the kitten had been through a lot more than just a night stuffed in a sack. It had fractured ribs on the left side, hence the trouble when it tried to hiss or cry out. There was also a clean break in the fibula of the right front leg, and the knee on the same leg seemed a lot worse for the wear too. The vet told Chris to leave the kitten for a few days so that he could give it the best care possible. The first thing he wanted to do was to suture the little animal to prevent it from further injuring itself. Reluctantly, Chris agreed. He gave the kitten a last look and promised to come around again at the end of the day. In the next few days, Chris went to the vet's office twice a day to check on the kitten. Every day, the kitten seemed a bit stronger. The vet was still worried, but the broken leg was healing well, and there were no signs of more problems inside the kitten's body. After 2 weeks, on a Thursday afternoon, Chris came to the vet's office as usual. The vet told him that the kitten was almost ready to go home, but he also suggested that they try to find an animal shelter to take care of the kitten since Chris didn't know where it came from. Chris didn't like that idea. He asked if the kitten was a boy or a girl, and when he learned it was a boy, he named the kitten Huck. Chris insisted on taking Huck home with him. He didn't want to risk the kitten going to a shelter where it might be put to sleep. Huck was going to be part of Chris' family and stay with him forever. What do you think of this story? Let us know in the comments section. Thank you.